today is the first day of what is quite a busy one for President Cyril Ramaphosa as he embarks on this royal state visit to the United Kingdom, where he's expected to sit and meet King Charles III. He's going to be given a tour of Buckingham Palace, and there's going to be quite a bit of pageantry that is put together on this state visit by our very own President Cyril Ramaphosa. But let's get some analysis now on what this means for economic and political ties between the two countries. And for that, we are joined by political economist Dr Lebohang Pheko. Pheko, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us, and an absolute pleasure having you on the show with us. One of the key questions for me that I think I've heard over the state visit of the president has been, you have King Charles III, who has just become the King of the United Kingdom, and the first state visit that he embarks on, or that takes place, is that of the South African president. What does that to you say about where South Africa is positioned in the geopolitical global landscape?
It's interesting. I mean, South Africa has been a very important regional partner for the UK, notwithstanding that, of course, there's a long and complicated colonial history. And there's a feeling that this is a relationship that has not been nurtured very well, but especially on the part of the United Kingdom, and that it has also been one that certainly has to do with the King Charles wanting to rebuild strategic relationship with South Africa and to cement his position within the Commonwealth. And I think we'll also appreciate that there is a lot of controversy around what the role and the future of the Commonwealth even should be now that Queen Elizabeth has passed away, and whether or not there's even a place for the Commonwealth and for the monarch in the 21st century, and what the role is of all of these, frankly, black and brown nations that are a constellation around the United Kingdom that reside in the Commonwealth. So I think he'll probably want to take President Ramaphosa on side in that regard, understanding that South Africa has a fairly still significant player in this regard. They're also going to want to talk more around partnership, and I think there's also the mood is that the tone has to be more egalitarian, even if it's only lip service, really. Remember that South Africa felt very let down by the way the West is, and including the United Kingdom, responded or not as efficaciously as they could have to the COVID-19 pandemic, including vaccine distribution. And I think this is an attempt to try to make good and come nice on that. And I think finally that King Charles III has a strong interest in the environment. So he will be interested to understand the energy and green transition that lies between, that lies between South Africa's, ecological and environmental plan that has been laid out quite clearly, and that the rest of the world is quite interested in. But I mean, of course, it raises as many questions as perhaps the answers that are available as well.
I want to sit actually on the point that you made at the back end there, Pheko, because you've talked about what those conversations could possibly look like for a climate discussion, and at a time when the president leaves the country, we're facing stage 4 yesterday, stage 5 load shedding. So the country certainly dealing with a very serious energy crisis. The international community asking for an energy transition. What is the right thing that the president says in discussions with King Charles III, and in his discussion even with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who we will be meeting as well on this trip?
And I think that the conversation with Prime Minister Sunak is the most significant one. I think we should also remember that one of the complexities and the dilemmas of this is that King Charles III he's a constitutional monarch. He hasn't got political sway, although it is known, it has been documented that he tries to. And of course, he's very interested in our environmental issues. In fact, one of the first trips he undertook to South Africa and Namibia as a young man was under the auspices of one of our own leading climate ecologists of the time. And I think that the other piece is that it also brings into question, remember that the UK has also pledged about £8 billion And this is really seen as a reset, 8 billion pounds towards energy and just transition. And I think those are conversations which really belong to the political realm, not the sort of ceremonial cup of tea visit, cup of tea and, crown visit at the Buckingham Palace that is represented. I mean, the pomp and circumstance are fair and good, but the real crux of the matter is what these conversations are going to look like once Prime Minister Sunak comes into the room and is in the fray. And that is really where I think we should direct our attention. So the bilateral agreements, the trade agreements between South Africa and the UK, what our key import and export advantages are and are not. Some of the terms of engagement, which also include the fact that for the last 10, 15 years, in fact, longer than that, South Africa has been on the visa list. And that's really, I think, a level of carelessness on the part of at the time, the Department of Home Affairs, where, of course, we've now put in the corrective action and have very stringent biometric passports, which are almost forgery proof. And I think that those are the sorts of conversations around access to people, lifting the visa regulations, for example. And remember that the UK were one of the first countries, for example, to show, I think, some diplomatic hostility to South Africa, and the world took their tone from them and the United States around the time when the COVID variant was found about 12 months ago, the Omicron. So there's a lot of rehabilitative work that needs to be done, to say the very least. But I do think that President Ramaphosa will hopefully be concentrating much more on the political arrangement. And also bearing in mind that they also want to bring South Africa on side regarding the war or the conflict between the Russia and the Ukraine.
Right.
Of course, the UK is very unhappy with our stance in this regard.
And that's a great place to go as well, because South Africa has been one of the very few countries on the globe that has said, well, we're going to play Switzerland where that matter is concerned. And I wonder what this means for that conversation. But I think just to wrap it up, and I am out of time, Pheko, but I think the most important thing for South Africans right now is watching the president on this royal state visit. Is this a visit that is going to be beneficial for us, whether that be economically or even in the global tug of war for our position on the war in the Ukraine?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether it will be. And I think that's probably where a lot of people have their ambivalence. A lot of people within the governing party have their ambivalences. A lot of ministers have their own ambivalences. There's skepticism about the Commonwealth and the monarch at its head. There's certainly been skepticism about the very tumultuous, to say the least, political terrain where in the UK, where we're seeing, I think, our third prime minister in a year. If that was an African country, I think by now we would have been calling in for sanctions and invading and calling for elections and so on and so forth. And I also think that at a time such as this, it does seem a bit tone deaf on the part of our own head of state to be out of the country. And I think, and particularly symbolically going to the bastion of colonial oppression and so forth, and wondering indeed what is the residual benefit, if any, that comes at a time when we're sitting here in the dark whilst the president is away. Not sure. Hopefully that President Ramaphosa will be able to report back positively upon his return.
Yeah. Dr. Pheko, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for speaking to us. That's Dr. Lebohang Pheko there. She is, of course, a political economist.